Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're back in War Thunder, and updates 1.67 brought a lot of new vehicles and lots of new mechanics, but one thing it also brought was a new PvE mode, and unfortunately the tank variant isn't out yet, but I'm sure it'll be here in the future. But what is here is the air version, Air Assault, which is basically an arcade wave mode defense of a point. And my general thoughts on it is that it is a really great start of something that could be made into something really fun to play. Even now it is quite fun to play, but I see its longevity not being very long for at least me personally. So let's get into Air Assault and basically what it comprises of, and maybe if you want to try it. So basically you are put on the map with a bunch of other players, generally 6 to 8, and there are 3 types of waves that can come at you. You have a bomber wave, which can come in the form of Lancasters or DO-217s, depending on the map that you're on. It obviously changes. I've only been on 2 types of map. It was Norway and I believe Stalingrad was the other one, but I'm sure there are more maps out there. And then you have a fighter wave, which are fighters which carry either bombs or rockets. So in my case, I had the Focke-Wulf 190s and Spitfire F Mark 24s. And then you get a howitzer wave. Now the howitzer wave is just a bunch of howitzers on the ground, which somebody has to mop up, generally quite far from the actual place that you're defending itself, but they fire onto it from a stationary position, so you have to attack them before they just keep chipping away damage from your point. Now, the way that the defense works is that you have a base, and you have an airfield next to the base, but the base works very similar to the ground points on most realistic maps, where if you bomb it out, depending on how many bombs you throw at it, then you lose the match. In realistic battles you generally have 3 of these zones, and once you destroy them, then the enemy has to destroy the airfield. Well, in this mode you just have one massive defensive point that you have to defend. It does have more health, I suppose you would call it, than these realistic points, but that's the basic concept. And enemies, depending on the waves, can come from different areas, different sides, and different altitudes. The bombers generally are around 3,000 to 4,000 meters, and then the fighters are generally from 1,000 to 2,000, and then obviously the howitzers are on the ground. So that's basically how the game mechanics work, and it's kind of fun. At least for a few times in my experience. There is obviously ways to be a lot more efficient with it. If you think about it, your choice of plane makes quite a big difference. Generally it only lets you use fighters. There are some exceptions where I have seen a few ME-410s, but in my when picking the mode, I was only really allowed, when I was trying to play Russia, I was only really allowed to use fighters such as the Yang-9UT and stuff like that, but when I switched to Americans it was much more P-47 and P-51 orientated. And overall, most of the waves, they generally have about 20 or 15 planes, or 14, 12, around that area. And your standard match, if you actually complete it, will take around 30 minutes, depending on how efficient you are at killing the waves. I have lost quite a few matches, and I've also won some. Generally, if you have quite a coordinated team, or you can see an area where your team is struggling with, then generally you should do pretty well. What I think could be added to this game mode to make it at least a lot better is voice communication, because obviously using text chats, when we get to the later levels, and you know, more than one wave is spawning at once, you can get a clump of people who go for the same wave and leave the other one to go past, or people just don't go for the howitzers, because once you lose that altitude it is quite hard to get it back again. You are able to J out and get into another plane, even the same plane. So a lot of the times when I was flying the P-47N, a Lancaster, which has the 50s in the front, in the back, sorry, it would knock out my engine, so I could just J out straight away, and then I could click to battle, and I would be straight back in there with a fully fresh plane. It does cost you some silver lions, so that's something to think about. But if you complete the mission, you generally get quite a decent amount of silver lions. Research or RP was generally the bit that people were concerned about, especially myself. I was wondering if this mode would be worth it in terms of research points. It is kind of hard to say right now if it's worth it or not. Here is a match that I played on Norway on the screen right now. And as you can see, targets destroyed 49, ground targets destroyed 13, 185 hits, 47 criticals, and 16 assists. That was able to bank me 35,000, and generally the silver lions I didn't make a lot because I had to J out and get into another plane, which cost me about 8,000 silver lions a time. And the RP itself, from a tier 4 aircraft researching a tier 5 one, 2,590. So that's about 50 air targets killed for 2,600 research. So over a 30-minute period. If you think that's worth it, then obviously you should go for it. I think in planes, it may not be worth it, but that's because I'm a realistic player, and generally I can make more in a realistic game in a premium over the span of about 10 minutes, whereas in arcade maybe it might be worth it for you. I haven't really looked at how much RP you can make in arcade. What I do know is that in tank arcade you really don't make a lot of RP. I'm actually struggling right now to unlock the Centurion Mark 1 just because it's taking so damn long to do it. Not just because British tanks, in my opinion, are some of the worst in game, but because of also I keep losing matches, so I only make around 500 RP, which obviously isn't great. So if this mode comes to, ground forces, which it is going to, in some sort of wave form, maybe heavy, medium, and light tanks, then if I'm able to get the same amount of RP, I'll probably just keep playing it over and over again, because it will be a good way to grind out vehicles. It will be a good way to gain RP for tanks, instead of just getting murdered over and over again in arcade battles. But in air battles, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the RP gains. You'll have to decide by yourself. One of the great things that Gaijin said and want to promote this mode for is that they talked about the fact that what they want is people to use it as kind of either a training mode or a practice mode. Before you get into your PvP modes, you play one mission of this, and you get your aim sorted. Maybe you want to test out an aircraft before you want to take it into a battle. Maybe you just want to practice your aim and try and shoot down a bunch of AI. That is a great idea. That is the perfect idea that you should use this mode for. You should use it for practice on how to shoot planes, on ammo conservation, on how to be as efficient as possible with the ammo that you have. Where certain planes are maybe not as defensively minded, or maybe they have some weak spots that you can try and attack. Stuff like that, basically working on your aim, something that I talked about before. I think that's a really good use for this mode. Now, if you complete a one battle a day, what you get is a chest, and generally the chest will have either an RP booster, or a research booster I should say, or a silver lines booster. So even if you don't think the rewards for vehicle research and silver lines is that good, then what you can have is that you can also get a booster. So that is another reason to play this mode, and I think that's a pretty good reason. Generally the boosters can be very useful, especially if you're not running premium, so that's another reason to play it. So let's talk about why I think it's a good start, but not but something to be built upon, right? Like at this moment in time, this is the first time we're seeing this mode, and you know, that's really about it. We don't see any of the design behind it or anything like that. We just see that there are 3 types of waves, and you know, that's basically it. And you have a base to defend. So, how can we build upon this? Well, first of all, variation of vehicle, I think, is something that needs to be done. If you have just constant waves of a certain type of bomber and also a certain type of fighter, then obviously it can get tedious over time, even though different fighters and different bombers will react differently, which I find kind of interesting, the way that they fly and stuff like that, but we'll get into the AI in a bit. So variation is needed in the waves. You could definitely do attacker waves, dive bomber waves. If you're talking about Germany, you could throw in Stukas to give that different feel. If you're talking about Russians, you can throw in PE-3s, maybe even A-20Gs, but for the Americans, but that would be kind of annoying. For the British, you could throw in Mosquitoes, or you could throw in Beaufighters with rockets. The good thing is, because the core mode is good and it works very well, then all you really need to do is change what planes spawn in to attack you. And I think with the core foundation that this game has, then that is completely possible. When we talk about ground units, obviously I talked about howitzers, how they're stationary and they shoot the points. What would be nice to see is maybe armored cars, so that come in and attack your point. Maybe they have they're able to capture the points and you have to destroy them before they capture it. Maybe you have some defenses on the point. Maybe you have AA around. Maybe you have howitzers or pillboxes which can attack the enemies as they come in. Just some kind of defensive armament which isn't just fighters. I understand that you want to put it all on the player, but if you add more stuff to the chaos, then eventually you're going to have to put AI on one side. Something that would be interesting, which we see in mission editor battles, is the fact that players can get a squadron behind them. You can actually get 3 planes with you in a diamond formation, and they'll generally attack what you attack, but sometimes they'll get a bit sidetracked. It would be interesting if you could throw that in. You could have basically a squadron leader in the form of yourself, and then you have 3 planes behind you in the form of AI. And maybe that just adds more to the atmosphere. That means that you could add more planes in when it comes to these waves. That means that it would properly look like a battle instead of 6 or 8 fighters against formations. But I suppose in Britain, in the Battle of Britain, that did actually happen quite a lot. So, you know, it depends on your perspective, really. But going back to the armored cars thing, I think having armored cars coming to capture the point would be great. The only reason I say only armored cars is because obviously you can generally only take fighters or some heavier aircraft such as the Me-410. So bringing anything above armored cars means that a lot of players will probably not be able to pen them, even light tanks. So I think armored cars is the way to go when we're talking about doing certain things like that. So yeah, there's the foundation that we have is wonderful. It is something that you can really build upon. There are a few issues with the AI, such as when the Lancasters on the Norway map were spawning in, sometimes they either some of them spawned in on top of each other, or spawned in very close to each other, and the AI have this, we'll focus on this point. So either they were spawning in on top of each other, or one would be going slightly faster when they spawned in. So, you know, they would crash into each other. So when you see a wave of Lancasters coming towards you, there may be one which just is falling out the air for some reason. So little things like that need to be fixed. And but, you know, overall that's not a big deal, since it only affects really 1 or 2 planes coming in. Another thing that has always been there with the AI since I've played the game, so like over 3 years now, is the fact that the AI always runs on the lead plane. If you ever look at an AI formation, they either fly in a triangle or a diamond formation, so in sets of 3 or 4, depending on how many planes there are in that formation. So in the triangle or the diamond formation, what happens is if you hit the lead plane, and let's say you unbalance it and it decides to go to the side, 2 or 3 planes are going to follow it. So there is a really easy way to game the system. When we look at this PvE mode, you shoot the you shoot the leaders of the triangle or the diamond formations, and then everyone else goes haywire. And this has always been present when we look at AI bombers and AI fighters. So I just wonder if that could be changed. Maybe it would be better if the AI would still go to the targets instead of follow the guy in front of them. Something also is the fact that because they follow that front bomber, if you do damage to its engines or if it loses power, then what happens is the AI behind that bomber, or fighter in this case, will try and slow down to basically try and make sure that the bomber is still the lead plane. So a lot of the times what you'll see is you'll actually see bombers which have their engines completely cut and landing flaps out because they're trying to stay behind a plane which has 3 engines out and is struggling to stay in the air. So that is something that needs to be addressed. One of the biggest issues I thought would be in this game mode was the AI, because the AI hasn't really changed over the last 3 years, apart from in realistic battles, where obviously they took it out. When we look at AI teammates, because, well, let's just say they were a bit too friendly when it came to following people. But overall, the AI has actually been pretty good in this game mode. Apart from the few little things I talked about, well, they've actually been pretty good. Something that is kind of annoying though is the fact that the AI gunners on a lot of bombers are incredibly accurate. They always have been, and this may be just down to the fact that you may have 8 or 12 planes attacking you at the same time. I suppose that that does mean though that you have to learn where to approach the bombers from. So maybe that's a good thing, depending on how you see it. But overall, it is a fun mode. I like it. It would be nice to see a bit more variation. The maps I've seen so far, they do have a variation. And hopefully there are more maps. Hopefully in the future we get more different waves. What would be nice is to have maybe a little defensive squadron of AI for the bombers. Maybe you have a group of 4 fighters on the enemy team which decide that they're going to protect the bombers. Maybe some fighter escort. Something like that, because even the fighters which come in a wave, they are dead on focused to attack the points. They're not going to attack you back. The only time people decide to attack you back is the gunners on the bombers. So maybe you could throw something like that in. Maybe you could throw in some kind of squadron which decides that it's not going to be your day today. But I am really looking forward to the tank assault one after having a lot of fun with the air assault mode, and in the next few days look for some other vehicles. Maybe eventually I'll get that Centurion Mark 1. I'll see you next time.